All right, everyone. Welcome back to the We Shall Not Sleep podcast. This is coming out a little late than what was planned. I apologize. It's not that I forgot per se. It's just that yesterday, the Christmas Day, even though it fell on a Wednesday, my mind was not with my podcast. It was with my loved ones, my family. And so I wanted to hop on here midday on Boxing Day to the Canadians and wish you all a Merry Christmas. Because for me, Christmas season doesn't stop ever. It is something that's continual. Now, I do celebrate. I leave my Christmas decorations, majority of them, all the way up through the 12 days of Christmas till the start of Christmas Tide on January 7th. But I do actually keep a little placard in my entryway that says Merry Christmas, and I keep that all the way up until Lent. And the reason why is because we can celebrate the virtues of Advent, the themes that we've talked about here on this podcast before and that we've just got done commemorating and celebrating in my church, the themes of hope, peace, joy, and love. And the reason why we can have that is because Advent has its lasting meaning. It has something that goes beyond, it extends because of Jesus' resurrection. And I've said this many times before to my church, and I'll say it again here, that in the Christian calendar, if we're not celebrating and anticipating the Advent season, we're celebrating and anticipating the Easter season, because those two fold into one another. They have meaning because of one another. We can't celebrate with joy and hope and peace and love if it wasn't for Christ's resurrection. Like, that's just, otherwise Christmas doesn't have any meaning, or we would just be like our Jewish ancestry, that Christmas is just like, yeah, whatever. It doesn't really have any spiritual significance because they don't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. So for us, the reason why we can look at it differently, well beyond a cultural context of gift giving and this phony version of love and peace or whatever for material gain and all these things where people put on a good face and they pretend to be happy for like one day and then everything gets back to normal. And you got New Year's celebration, but business hours, our consumeristic tendencies change a lot. Everyone's busy. They stress themselves out because they're traveling or seeing family, hosting people. People seem to be stressed out and exhausted after the holidays, even after they've had times off, where maybe you have seen and encountered people where they're like, now I need another vacation from this vacation. And I can relate to that in a certain extent because as a pastor, Christmas really isn't a off day for me. It's a work day. And yet at the same time, I find that there's a duality in my spirit sometimes because of the Christmas season, because of that very aspect that, for a lot of people, it just seems like it's a lot of pomp and circumstance and for nothing, essentially. And even us Christians, where maybe we are tempted to just kind of retreat back into our own rituals, routines, traditions, etc. after the new year, where maybe those New Year's plans last for a couple weeks and then are kind of diminished, and then you get in the dog days of winter in February. And for us in the Midwest, you don't see the sun a whole lot. We're tired of the snow. We want spring to be here. And so we try to usher in Easter time as quickly as possible, because then you can get a routine of Lent and maybe giving up something that you really think you should give up. And there's a lot of things, right? There's a lot of things that we as Christians do throughout our year where the fragmentations of the year turn into little segments, and those segments dictate what we do, how we think, how we feel, and our faith just becomes very predictable. That's the end outcome. And so for me as a pastor, trying to preach and teach the word of the gospel, trying to preach this invigorating message to make people's hearts reignited for the Lord like they once were in ages past, it can become challenging where it's like, okay, well, I really can't say or teach anything that people don't already know during Christmas because everyone knows it. But the question is, does it actually find its root in fertile soil? That's the question. And what I always find is that regardless of where you fall in regards to Jesus Christ, if you're Son of God or not, Jesus Christ, Son of God, is he the true Messiah? Was he a false teacher? Did he exist or not? All of the responses to that question that you hear from a religious, philosophical response to agnostic, atheistic response, and then from other religious responses. It's the answer to that question. What have we done with God's Son that's going to separate each and every person that's ever existed? That's the creed of the Christian tradition. And what I find is that trying to teach people and get them to understand and maybe make a life change, that's what's difficult. And so where I am excited to move beyond Christmas time, because our culture in the West here is so dominated by the consumeristic nature of the holiday itself, that's what dominates it. And there's a lot of commentary on whether Jesus was actually born on December 25th or not. I think the evidence leans not. And yet, at the same time, that I don't think we're going to be held to account for that, but it could, because it's about commemoration. It's kind of do this in remembrance of me in regards to the Eucharist, that there isn't necessarily a set schedule. I don't think God's going to hold us to, like, you didn't do it on the days ending in Y. It's like, well, it's doing it in remembrance, or every so often that you do this, pause. And that's what we're doing, as we are commemorating the night of our Savior's birth. So therefore, if we're doing that in spirit and truth, and we're worshiping in spirit and truth, my whole contention is that once you encounter Jesus, you can't go away being the same, kind of like Paul being knocked off of his high horse. And so it is with that understanding that, for me personally, I anticipate the Christmas season remaining in our hearts through the rest of the year, but I also know that I want people to be completely honest with themselves. You see, if you are lying to yourself, how could you accept truth into your life, that being the gospel, versus just being honest with where you're at with your faith, how you feel? And so moving beyond the consumeristic holiday, when people kind of settle back into the routine and they're maybe not as guarded, maybe not as jaded, not as emotional, not as fake, if dare I say, in certain cases, where we kind of we still wear a mask, but it's not as pretty of a mask per se, that we can start speaking again. And so it's like, I want to get through this consumeristic holiday. I want to get all the interruptions in our work schedule. I do want to see people return to the routine so you can have a captive audience again, because people are so distracted when the routine gets unsettled. Now, I don't like routine for routine's sake either. I think that's part of our ritualistic nature, rather, as Christians, that hinder our faith. But because we're so used to the ritual and our own routines, that once you get us out of that, we become so distracted we can't hear anything. And so I don't want to force people out of the routine. What I'd rather do is let them come out of it themselves through the calling of the gospel, where they realize the routine is not the end all to be all. And so the routine of Christmas, the title of today's episode, is what do we do? Is it the routine of Christmas that we just kind of go through life just by the numbers, so to speak, during this holiday season? And we hear all the same messages, we sing all the same songs, we see the same smiles, we get the similar gifts, and then that is it. And then we're done until next year. Or does maybe the routine and rhythm of Christmas season every year, does that carry us through to Easter, and then Easter carries us through to Christmas because of the hope, peace, joy, and love that we experience during those seasons? And then so all of those we can go to, because then we point to Lent, where it's gratitude of Christ's sacrifice who goes before us. It's one season folding into another, where those truths carry you for the rest of the year. And you got to even think about this too. By the time Easter comes around, it is more of a joyous time, right? Like, especially in my life, because, for those Midwesterners who haven't seen the sun in 4 months, like, we're getting longer days, it's getting warmer, we're seeing the sun more, the summer is coming, and there's a lot of celebration with graduations and plans for the summer and vacations. And as we anticipate the Christmas season, what do you have? Thanksgiving that precedes it. And maybe the changing of the weather, the sports, right? Football returns in the fall. So there's a lot of things in our culture that are incredibly relevant to as we approach the Christmas season. But then there's the immediacy thereafter in the Christmas season, where there's like this 2.5 month long time of just right, this slog. Now I'm not speaking for those in like Texas, Arizona, like the South, or out west in California. Like that's a little bit different from you folks. But there's still like this dead period, right? Of like, what are we doing in the Christian calendar? It's like, well, we've celebrated Christ's coming. Now let's examine his life, and then we commemorate what he has ultimately come to do, which is be the propitiation, the final propitiation for our sins. So this duality of Christmas where it's like, I want it to be over, but then I also don't ever want the spirit of Christmas to leave me. You know, that like what is the purpose of this Christmas season? And so really what I want to leave us with today is the reflection of Christmas, and that it ought to carry over into our daily lives. Our response to God's Son, that's the ultimate question we have to answer. May it be transformative and not just a matter of routine. So, with that being said, I hope this message falls on fertile soil. May it be a blessing to you, and therefore, may God bless you and may God keep you. Merry Christmas.